Why did he always have to say it like that? The question had echoed in her mind for years, but that night it felt sharper than ever. She had driven 8 hours in her working blues, straight from a classified briefing in Norfolk, just to be at her cousin's engagement party. She had walked in hoping her family might notice the exhaustion in her eyes, or at least the fact that she had shown up despite a schedule that rarely allowed her to. But before she had even set her bag down, she heard it again. She's still washing dishes on some floating cafeteria, her father told his golf buddies, loud enough for the entire table to hear. The men laughed, glasses clinked. The joke landed again. She stood there, frozen for a moment, hands tightening around the strap of her bag. The last time he had used the line was at her sister's wedding. The time before that at Christmas in front of the entire extended family. 24 years of service, rank upon rank, ribbons earned in silence, and to him, it was always the same punchline. Monica, the dishwasher in uniform. Her mother flinched as if struck. Her sister Emma rolled her eyes and muttered something about Monica still playing Navy. Nobody stopped him. Nobody corrected him. Not once. And the strangest part, she didn't say anything either. She just let the words pass, like smoke filling a room she had grown too used to breathing in. She gave a thin smile, nodded politely at the men, and excused herself to the kitchen. But something burned inside her that night. A memory, a question, a voice that would not quiet down. Why did I let them believe this for so long? The truth was complicated. The truth had always been complicated. When she was 17, she had announced she was applying to the Naval Academy. Emma had already stacked her beauty pageant crowns on her dresser, polished like trophies. Jake, the youngest, was already being scouted by colleges for football. And Monica, she was the quiet one, the one who read books in corners, the one who always wanted more, though she rarely said it out loud. Her father hadn't hidden his disappointment. "Great," he had said flatly. Monica found her calling scrubbing pots on a boat. The joke stuck. It never left the house. It followed her into adulthood. What her father never knew, what her entire family never knew, was that within 5 years of that dismissive line, she was commanding teams in the Pacific, tracking illicit financial flows that funded terror networks. By the time Emma was on her second marketing promotion and Jake was winning regional coaching awards, Monica was sitting in secure rooms under fluorescent light, poring over intelligence files that shaped national policy. She had briefed officers who would later command fleets. She had stood shoulder to shoulder with men who never underestimated her. But her family, they only ever saw the uniform. They never asked what the insignia meant. They never wanted to hear. By the time she made Rear Admiral, she didn't even bother correcting them anymore. It was easier to let the myth live. She told herself it didn't matter. Her sailors knew. The Pentagon knew. The President of the United States knew. She had briefed him 3 times. That was enough. But deep down she knew it was. That night at the engagement party, standing in the kitchen while laughter drifted in from the dining room, she felt it heavier than before. The loneliness, the isolation, the cost of silence. She washed her hands at the sink, ironic, almost cruel, and stared at her reflection in the dark glass of the window. For a moment, she imagined telling them, telling the entire room, dropping the truth like a grenade on their comfortable little assumptions. But she didn't. She stayed quiet. She always stayed quiet. 3 years later, she would wish she hadn't. Because 3 years later, the phone call came. She had been in Washington for Admiral Richardson's retirement ceremony, her own uniform pressed to perfection, the weight of her insignia carried like a quiet truth she didn't need to explain to anyone. The call came from her sister Emma. She almost didn't answer. But the second she heard the broken sob on the other end of the line, she knew. Something had fractured back home. "Monica, you need to come home now. It's Jake." Her hand tightened around the phone. Jake, the golden child, the coach, the star, their father's pride, what could possibly? "What happened?" Emma's voice cracked. "He's been arrested." For a moment, Monica didn't breathe. She glanced at the ceremony unfolding around her, the rows of uniforms, the flags, the tradition. A world that made sense. Then her sister's words cut back in, jagged. Federal charges. The FBI raided his house this morning. Mom's having chest pains. Dad won't come out of his office. Her mind raced. What kind of charges? A long silence. Then Emma whispered, financial crimes, misappropriating funds from the Youth Athletics Foundation. They're saying millions. Monica, the FBI. She closed her eyes. The irony was almost unbearable. Financial crimes, her brother, the one who was supposed to be untouchable. I'll be there tonight, she said, her voice steady. The drive from D.C. to Westerville, Ohio, gave her 5 hours to think. 5 hours to replay every family gathering, every joke, every dismissal. 5 hours to wonder if they would finally see her differently or if they would cling to the myth even now. Jake had always been the favorite, the boy who made the local papers, the son who hung plaques on her father's office wall while Monica's commendations gathered dust in drawers he never opened. And now the golden boy was falling. She gripped the wheel tighter, headlights cutting through the dark highway. What would they see when she walked through that door? A daughter who had come home to help, or the same woman they believed never rose above the galley? Her chest tightened. She wanted to be strong for them, for her mother, for Jake even. But a small, almost childlike voice inside her whispered, what if they never see me at all? When she arrived after midnight, the house felt smaller, dim, heavy. Her mother sat at the kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee in her hands, lines carved deeper into her face. Her father sat across from her, staring into nothing. Monica, her mother stood, clutching her as if afraid she might vanish. I'm so glad you're here. Her father barely looked up. Even then, even in crisis, she was still the daughter who slopped food on ships. She carried her bag upstairs, the silence pressing on her like armor she hadn't asked for. Lying awake in her childhood room, she thought about the irony of it all. Her father's golden son was now in FBI custody. And she, the one he had mocked for decades, was the only one in that house who understood just how deep his troubles might run. She stared at the ceiling until morning light bled through the curtains, and with it came a thought she couldn't shake. They don't know who I am, not really, but they're about to find out. Why had she chosen the Navy in the first place? The question had followed her since she was 17, standing on the porch of their Ohio home with an acceptance letter trembling in her hands. She could still remember the ink smudges where her sweat had touched the page. Her heart had been a storm that day, pride, fear, defiance, and something harder to name. She hadn't told her family until dinner. Her father had been cutting into his steak, her mother refilling glasses. Emma was already talking about prom dresses. Jake was planning his next football game. Monica had slipped the letter across the table, the word congratulations bold at the top. Her father had barely looked, just one quick glance, then a smirk. Great. Monica found her calling scrubbing pots on a boat. The words had burned. She remembered staring at him, waiting for him to laugh and say he was kidding. But the smirk stayed. Emma had laughed politely. Jake had snorted. And her mother had done what she always did, change the subject. That night Monica had sat alone in her room, the acceptance letter folded in her lap. She could have torn it up. She could have decided it wasn't worth fighting the weight of their dismissal. But something inside her hardened instead. If they wouldn't believe in her, she would believe in herself. The Naval Academy was not what she expected. It was harder, sharper. Every day demanded more than the one before. But for the first time she felt alive in her struggle. She woke at dawn with the others, ran until her lungs burned, studied until her eyes blurred. She failed sometimes, staggered under the weight of expectation, but she never quit. She learned to stand straighter, to speak with authority, to fight not just with muscle but with mind, and she learned to keep her silence. When other cadets called home, bragging about achievements, Monica rarely mentioned hers. She had learned too early that her father didn't want to hear about leadership evaluations or perfect scores. If she told him about earning top marks in seamanship, he would joke that she'd mastered carrying trays. If she explained that she was training in advanced navigation, he'd say she was learning how to scrub a different deck. So she stopped telling. She built a wall inside herself, a place where she could keep her pride safe from their mockery. By the time she graduated, her father didn't even attend the ceremony. Emma had claimed she had a work trip. Jake had a football camp. Only her mother came, sitting stiffly in the folding chairs, clapping politely as Monica marched across the stage in her dress whites. Monica never forgot that moment, standing tall while her mother's quiet hands clapped, and the absence of everyone else echoed louder than the Navy band. Her first deployments were quiet ones, intelligence work, long nights in cramped rooms where the air smelled like sweat and coffee, eyes locked on glowing screens. She wasn't carrying a rifle in the field, but she was fighting a different kind of war, following money trails, watching how illegal funds crossed oceans like shadows. Every number told a story, and sometimes those stories saved lives. But when she came home on leave and her father introduced her at church as our daughter who washes dishes on ships, none of that mattered. The dismissals became routine. At Emma's wedding, he had even joked with the minister that Monica was still slopping food on some aircraft carrier. Emma, dressed in her perfect gown, had laughed. Monica had smiled politely, but inside a crack deepened. Years passed, ranks rose. Monica pinned new insignia to her uniform with quiet dignity. She commanded units. She briefed generals. Eventually, she found herself in secure conference rooms, pointing out vulnerabilities in networks that could cripple enemies. Men twice her age listened when she spoke. Presidents leaned forward across tables when she delivered her reports. And still, at every family gathering, her father told the dishwasher story. Sometimes she tried to correct him. Actually, I was promoted to commander last year, she would say, or I just took over a new division. But the corrections fell into silence, brushed aside with a joke. Well, maybe they'll let you move up to the salad station next time. It was easier to stop trying. She told herself she didn't need them to understand, that her worth didn't come from their validation. Her sailors knew who she was, the Navy knew, the Pentagon knew. But late at night, when the uniform hung in her closet and she sat alone in her apartment, a part of her ached. Not because she doubted herself, but because she wished, just once, that her father might look at her and see the truth. When she made Rear Admiral, she didn't even call home. The news had been delivered in a wood-paneled office at the Pentagon. Her hand had trembled slightly as she signed the papers. The stars on her shoulder had felt heavier than anything she had worn before, heavy with responsibility, heavy with sacrifice. That night she had stared at her reflection in the mirror, whispering the words out loud. Rear Admiral Phillips. It felt unreal. She thought about calling her mother. She thought about sending a message to Emma or Jake, but she didn't. She knew what the response would be. Another joke, another dismissal, another reminder that no matter how high she climbed, to them she would always be the dishwasher in uniform. So she stayed silent. The silence became habit, years of it, layers upon layers, until even Monica began to wonder if maybe this was who she was to them, the invisible daughter, the one who chose a life too far from their world. But the silence had a cost. She hadn't realized just how deep until that phone call from Emma. Jake arrested, FBI federal charges. As she drove through the night back to Ohio, the memories pressed in on her. Every joke, every dismissal, every time her father's eyes had passed over her accomplishments like they were smoke. And now, the son who could do no wrong was in handcuffs. Her mind spun with questions. What had Jake done? How deep did it go? What would her family do when they realized she knew this world better than any of them? The headlights carved a narrow path through the darkness. Her hands were steady on the wheel, but inside her chest was a storm. She thought about her father sitting in his office, blinds closed, pretending the world wasn't collapsing around him. She thought about Emma, still holding on to her perfect image, desperate to keep the cracks hidden. And she thought about her mother, fragile, carrying the weight of everyone else's silence. And then she thought about the trial. She didn't know the details yet, but she knew enough. Federal charges, financial crimes, millions missing. That meant paper trails, witnesses, records, the kind of evidence that didn't bend easily. And sooner or later, the truth would surface. She gripped the wheel tighter. Her father's dishwasher daughter was about to become someone else entirely in their eyes, not because she wanted it, not because she needed it, but because the truth had a way of breaking through silence. And deep down she knew, when it happened, their world would never look the same again. How could the house feel so much smaller? That was the first thought Monica had as she pulled into the driveway just after midnight. The siding looked worn, the shutters slightly crooked, and the front porch light buzzed with the faint hum of age. This was the house she had grown up in, the place where birthday cakes and family dinners had once filled the air. But now, standing there with her overnight bag in hand, it felt heavy, shrunk by crisis, weighted by silence. The door creaked when she pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and something sharper, fear maybe, though she couldn't name it out loud. Her mother sat at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. She looked older than her 68 years, hair disheveled, eyes swollen from crying. Across from her, her father sat rigid, staring at nothing, his tie still knotted like he had forgotten how to take it off. "Monica!" Her mother stood, and for a moment, Monica was a child again, caught between wanting to retreat and needing to be held. The hug was fierce, almost desperate. Her mother's voice cracked. "I'm so glad you're here." Her father didn't look up. His eyes stayed fixed on the table, jaw clenched tight. Even now, even when the golden boy had fallen, Monica was invisible. She carried her bag upstairs to her old room, the walls still faintly painted with the soft blue she had chosen as a teenager. The trophies that once belonged to Jake were gone, his victories relocated to her father's office. Emma's beauty crowns had never been displayed here. Her sister would never have let them share space. Monica's shelves were still lined with books, dusty now, but each one a reminder of who she had been before uniforms and insignia replaced teenage dreams. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sleep refused to come. Instead, memories circled like restless ghosts. Her father's smirk when she announced the academy, his jokes at Emma's wedding, the way Emma herself had leaned into the narrative, introducing Monica to friends as my sister who joined the Navy but never really advanced. And now Jake in custody, the FBI in their lives, the story breaking in tomorrow's headlines. The thought tightened in her chest. They still don't know who I am, and they're about to find out. Morning came with sharp light cutting through the blinds. The coffee pot gurgled downstairs. She dressed quickly, pulling her hair into a bun out of habit. Her uniform was still in her bag, folded, pressed, but she left it there. Today wasn't about rank. Not yet. The local paper had already arrived. The headline sprawled across the front page. Local coach charged in $2.3 million youth sports fraud. Her mother sat at the table again, the newspaper folded to hide the worst of it. Her father sat beside her, eyes red, face pale, but his pride still tried to speak through the cracks. "Jake, a good boy," he muttered. "He wouldn't steal from children." Monica said nothing at first. She studied his face, the stubborn line of his jaw, the way his hand trembled against the paper. She wanted to tell him the truth, that the evidence would be overwhelming, that federal prosecutors didn't bring charges unless their case was airtight. But she kept her voice measured. "The evidence suggests otherwise," she said quietly. His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What would you know about it? You push trays around a ship. Jake runs a multi-million-dollar program." The words landed like blows. Old wounds reopened in an instant. Monica's hand tightened around her coffee mug. She could have told him everything right then. She could have laid out her credentials, her years overseeing financial investigations, the divisions she had commanded. She could have told him she had been briefed on cases that shook nations. But she didn't. Emma arrived a few hours later, her perfect world crumbling around the edges. Her makeup was smudged, her hair pulled back hastily, her husband trailing behind with their two teenagers who looked lost and uncomfortable. She collapsed into a chair, words spilling fast. "What are we going to do? The lawyers want $60,000 just for a retainer. Jake's contract is suspended. Sarah's friends are already asking questions. This is destroying us." Monica listened. Emma's panic was raw, but there was something else beneath it, the same dismissal she had always carried for her sister. The assumption that Monica's presence couldn't possibly mean help. And then it came, the words Monica had expected. "Monica, I know you want to help," Emma said carefully, "but this is serious federal stuff. We need real lawyers, not your kitchen duty sister." She didn't say it, but she didn't need to. The knife was already in place. Monica excused herself quietly and stepped outside. The air was cold against her face, sharp in her lungs. She pulled out her phone and began making calls. She didn't call to brag. She didn't call to correct anyone. She called because she knew better than anyone in that house just how deep this case was going to run. By afternoon, reporters had gathered outside the courthouse. The story was spreading, faces pressed against cameras, microphones chasing sound bites. Jake's name was everywhere. Local hero, beloved coach, now fraud. Her father walked into the living room, tie straightened again, trying to mask the devastation. He muttered under his breath about mistakes, about misunderstandings, about how the truth would come out. But Monica saw the cracks. The way his shoulders slumped when no one was watching. The way his hands shook when he thought of Jake behind bars. That night, Monica sat alone in the backyard, the stars faint against the suburban glow. She thought about the years she had given to silence, about the years her father had given to pride, and she wondered which had cost them more. She knew the trial would come quickly. She knew the evidence would be merciless. And she knew her family had no idea that the truth waiting in that courtroom would shatter every lie they had told themselves about her. Her mother opened the sliding door, stepping outside with a sweater pulled around her shoulders. She sat beside Monica without speaking for a long time. The silence was different from her father's, softer, fragile. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know how to hold this family together." Monica looked at her, really looked. The lines of age, the weight of years carrying 3 children who had all gone their separate ways. She wanted to reach out to tell her she wasn't alone, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she said, "We'll get through it." Her mother nodded, eyes glistening, though it was clear she wasn't convinced. The night air pressed heavy around them. Somewhere inside the house, her father poured another drink. Emma's voice carried through the walls, sharp with panic. And upstairs, Jake's room sat empty, stripped of trophies, stripped of pride. Monica tilted her head back, watching the stars disappear behind clouds. And the thought returned, quiet but insistent. "They don't know who I am, but soon they will." Why did the courthouse feel colder than the night air outside? Monica sat in the gallery, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes forward as the trial began. The wood benches were hard, the air heavy with whispers. Reporters shifted in the back row, pens scratching, cameras waiting for every expression, every falter. Her mother sat beside her, pale and trembling, clutching tissues like lifelines. Emma was on the other side, eyes darting nervously as if she could still control the narrative. And her father sat rigid, jaw locked, dressed in his best suit like he could armor himself with fabric. Jake sat at the defense table, shoulders squared but eyes betraying the panic beneath. The golden son, the pride of Westerville, now just another defendant in a courtroom, facing charges that would stain not only his name, but theirs. The prosecutor's voice was calm, deliberate, slicing through the silence. He outlined the charges with precision: misappropriation of funds, wire fraud, embezzlement. Over $2 million taken from the Youth Athletics Foundation. Money meant for children, uniforms, equipment, opportunities, siphoned instead into Jake's bank accounts, his boat, his vacation home. Monica listened without flinching. She had read cases like this before. She had heard the cadence of prosecutors laying out facts, step by step, brick by brick, until the wall of evidence was unshakable. But hearing it here against her brother carried a weight she could not set down. Her father's hand gripped the bench so tightly his knuckles turned white. His lips pressed thin, shaking with every accusation. He whispered once hoarse, "This isn't true." But the documents, the numbers, the witnesses, they spoke louder than denial. Reporters scribbled, heads bent low, but their eyes flicked often to the family row. To the mother dabbing her tears. To the sister with perfect hair trying to maintain composure. And to Monica, who sat silent, unreadable, as if she were a stranger among them. She knew how they saw her. The quiet one, the one who never said much. The one her father always joked about, dishwasher daughter, invisible sister. They couldn't have guessed, not yet, what silence she carried inside. The first witness took the stand, an accountant who had reviewed the foundation's finances. His testimony was clinical, detailed, and devastating. He walked through records, invoices, payments that never reached their intended destinations. He spoke of checks signed, accounts drained, money that disappeared into personal luxuries. Emma flinched with every word. Her mother covered her face with trembling hands. Her father sat forward, eyes narrowing, as if he could glare the evidence into vanishing. Monica sat still, heart steady, though inside she wrestled with a storm. She knew the patterns. She could see the gaps, the false vendors, the deliberate concealments. She had followed trails like these across continents, dismantling operations that funded warlords and cartels. And now those same patterns lay in front of her, tied not to an enemy across the ocean, but to her own brother. The weight of it pressed harder than the uniform ever had. During recess, they gathered in the hallway. Her mother leaned against the wall, pale and shaking. Emma whispered furiously to her husband, trying to spin, trying to find an angle that didn't collapse their world. And her father, he paced like a caged man, muttering about conspiracies, about jealous colleagues, about prosecutors with an agenda. When Monica spoke softly, "The evidence is strong," his head snapped up. "What would you know about it?" he barked, his voice sharp enough to draw stares. "You're not a lawyer, you're not an investigator. You wouldn't understand federal cases." The words cut deeper than he knew. He couldn't have guessed that his daughter had reviewed cases bigger than this, had signed off on reports that reached the Oval Office, had overseen teams that mapped financial webs stretching across borders. He couldn't have guessed, because he had never asked. Monica swallowed the words pressing against her throat. Not yet. The time hadn't come. The next days unfolded like a slow unspooling of shame. Witness after witness. Paper trail after paper trail. Emails, bank records, testimony. Each brick laid heavier than the last, building a wall Jake could not climb. Her father shrank each day, his shoulders drooping, his voice quieter, though the denial never fully left his eyes. Emma grew more brittle, snapping at questions, deflecting with desperate energy. Their mother simply cried, her strength eroded by grief. And Monica, she sat through it all still and silent, holding the storm inside. At night, she lay awake in her childhood room, staring at the ceiling where shadows played across the plaster. She thought about the sailors who had trusted her, the operations she had overseen, the lives changed by the cases she had helped break. And she thought about this, her family unraveling, not because of enemy fire or distant wars, but because of greed rooted in their own blood. She wondered if silence had been her mistake all along. The second week of trial began. The prosecution had saved their sharpest blade for last, a witness who could cut through all doubt, who could close the circle of evidence. The bailiff called the name, Special Agent Harrison. A young man in a dark suit stepped forward. His posture was crisp, his tone professional. He introduced himself as an agent of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. He spoke clearly, methodically, walking the jury through the investigation. He explained how Jake had manipulated accounts, how fake vendors were created, how false invoices concealed the theft. The jury leaned forward. The prosecutor's questions flowed, each one carving deeper. Jake's lawyer, Peterson, tried to fight back. His tone was sharp, almost mocking. He pushed at details, tried to paint the FBI as sloppy, overzealous. But Harrison held firm, calm under pressure. Then came the question that changed everything. "Agent Harrison," Peterson said, his voice thick with condescension, "isn't it true that this investigation was primarily handled by junior agents with limited experience in complex financial crimes?" The agent's gaze flicked briefly to the gallery. His eyes found Monica, just for a second. Then he answered, "No, counselor. This investigation was supervised at the highest levels." Peterson frowned. "By whom?" Harrison paused. His voice, when it came, was steady as stone. "The case was personally overseen by Rear Admiral Monica Phillips, director of the Navy's Financial Crime Investigation Division." The courtroom froze. Peterson blinked. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, but no words came. The silence was thick. Reporters scribbled furiously. The jury exchanged glances, and in the gallery her family erupted without a word. Her father's face went pale, then red, then pale again. His hands gripped the bench so hard she thought the wood might splinter. Emma's mouth dropped open, her head shaking as if denial could erase the sound. Her mother's tears stopped altogether, replaced by wide, stunned eyes fixed on her daughter. "Rear Admiral." The words hung in the air, heavier than any gavel. And Monica sat still, her face calm, her posture steady, though inside her heart pounded like a drumbeat echoing through the years. The dishwasher daughter, the invisible sister, the forgotten one. Now the truth was out. And there was no going back. What do you say when the truth detonates in a room? The courtroom emptied slowly, like people weren't sure they wanted to step back into the world after what they had just heard. The words still hung in the air, Rear Admiral Monica Phillips, echoing louder than the gavel that had called recess. Reporters whispered furiously into phones. Jurors avoided looking at the family row. Monica stood calmly, smoothing her skirt with steady hands, but inside her pulse thundered. She had trained herself to face tension with composure, to let storms break around her without flinching. But this wasn't a war room in the Pentagon. This wasn't a classified briefing. This was her family, and the truth she had hidden for decades had just been dragged into the open by an FBI agent who refused to downplay it. In the hallway, the ambush came. Her father was first. His face was pale, lips trembling, eyes searching hers like he had just realized she was a stranger. "Admiral," his voice cracked on the word like it didn't fit in his mouth. "You're an admiral." "Rear Admiral," she corrected quietly, because precision mattered even when her heart was breaking. Emma shook her head over and over as if she could undo it by force of will. "No, no, you let us believe. You let us think you were," she trailed off, the word unsaid but heavy in the space between them, "dishwasher." Monica held her gaze steady. "Yes, I know what you thought." Her mother didn't speak at first. Tears welled, not the quiet ones from before, but body-shaking sobs that left her trembling. She pressed a hand to her mouth, staring at her daughter like she was seeing her for the very first time. Her father leaned back against the wall, his shoulders collapsing inward. 24 years of jokes, his voice broke. "All this time, why didn't you stop me?" The question struck harder than any insult ever had. Monica swallowed, her throat tight. "I tried," she said softly. "Do you remember when I got promoted to commander? I called to tell you. You said, 'That's nice, honey.' Did they move you to the salad station? Do you remember when I got my own command? You told Uncle Ray I was probably in charge of the lunch shift now." The color drained from his face. His hands trembled against the wall. Emma's voice came sharp, almost shrill. "You let us believe. You let us go on for years, introducing you as the sister who never got past the kitchen. How could you?" Monica's voice stayed steady, though inside she felt every crack of the accusation. "I let you believe what you wanted to believe, despite every promotion, despite every commendation, despite every attempt I made to share my accomplishments with you. You chose the story you liked better." Silence followed, thick, unforgiving. Her mother finally whispered, her voice breaking, "Oh, Monica, what have we done?" Monica closed her eyes briefly. She had faced senators in hearings, briefed admirals in tense rooms, stood firm against questions meant to tear her apart. None of it compared to this hallway. None of it compared to the eyes of her family, finally seeing her and realizing what they had done. Her father stared at his hands, at the skin that had grown wrinkled with age, at the knuckles that had rapped tables as he told jokes at her expense. The man who had made her a punchline was now staring at a truth too large to hold. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "The investigation into Jake." She nodded. "I was running it, at least until I recused myself once his name surfaced." Emma's gasp was sharp. "You investigated your own brother." "I ensured your brother got a fair, thorough, and impartial investigation," Monica said, her tone steady, professional. "Which is more than he did for those children he stole from." Emma recoiled as if struck. Her mother sobbed harder, clutching tissues in her fist. Her father looked at her then, really looked, maybe for the first time in decades. His eyes scanned the uniform he had never bothered to understand, the insignia he had dismissed as decoration. He saw not the dishwasher daughter, not the invisible sister, but the woman who had carried 24 years of service without their recognition. "I don't understand," he whispered, his voice cracking like thin glass. "All those years, all those jokes, why didn't you stop me?" The question lingered. It lingered because the truth wasn't simple. She could have told him it was because he never listened, that every attempt she made was waved away with another smirk. She could have told him she was tired of being dismissed, tired of shouting into deaf ears. She could have told him she decided her work would speak for itself, even if her family refused to hear it. But the deeper truth was harder. She hadn't stopped him because, in some strange way, she had let the silence become armor. Let them believe she was nothing, because then they couldn't take away the pride she carried in secret. Let them think she was small, because she knew she was. But now, standing in that courthouse hallway, watching her father tremble, she realized the cost. The silence had protected her, but it had also stolen something from them. A chance to know her, to understand her, to be proud before it was too late. Jake's lawyer passed by, eyes flicking toward the family with irritation, already rehearsing how he might spin the Admiral's revelation. Reporters crowded the far end of the hall, their whispers rising, waiting for the next headline. Her father rubbed his eyes with a shaking hand. I don't know how to look at you." Monica's chest tightened. She wanted to reach for him to bridge the years, but she stayed still. "Then see me as I am," she said softly, "not who you thought I was." Emma turned away, muttering something under her breath, unable to face her sister's steady calm. Their mother reached for Monica's hand, gripping it with desperate strength, as if afraid she might vanish. The recess bell rang. The bailiff called everyone back inside. Monica released her mother's hand gently, straightened her shoulders, and walked back into the courtroom. Inside, whispers spread like fire. Rear Admiral, Navy, Director. The words circled, reshaping every glance cast her way. She could feel the weight of eyes, the sudden shift from invisibility to scrutiny. And yet she walked with the same quiet composure she always had. She took her seat. The trial continued. Witnesses spoke, lawyers argued, evidence stacked higher. But her family wasn't listening to the case anymore. Their eyes stayed on her, stunned, broken, searching. Monica didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She let the silence do what words never had. That night back in her childhood room, she sat on the edge of the bed, the silence pressing heavy. She thought of all the years she had given to service, of the sailors she had led, the missions she had overseen, the lives she had touched. She thought of her father's jokes, her sister's dismissals, her mother's silence. And she thought of the moment in that courtroom when the truth had finally cracked open. She whispered to herself, not out of pride, not out of anger, but as a quiet acknowledgement. They know now. But even as she said it, a question gnawed at her. Was it too late? How long could denial survive in the face of truth? By the third week of trial, the courtroom felt like a tomb. The air was heavy with fatigue, with shame, with the slow grinding of inevitability. The prosecution's case had been devastating. Every witness, every document, every detail tying Jake tighter to the fraud that had siphoned millions from children who had needed him most. Monica sat in the gallery day after day, her posture unchanged, her eyes steady. On the outside, she was the same quiet figure she had always been. On the inside, every word of testimony was a knife, carving through the family she had once longed to protect. Jake's lawyer, Peterson, still fought. His voice grew sharper with each passing day, his arguments more desperate. He suggested clerical errors, overzealous investigators, misunderstandings. He pointed at charts, waved papers, raised his voice until it cracked. But the jury saw through it. The evidence was too strong, too clear, too undeniable. Each time Peterson faltered, Monica felt the shift ripple through the gallery. Her father's shoulders sagged lower. Her mother's tissues piled higher. Emma whispered furiously, clinging to denial like a rope fraying in her hands. And Jake sat at the defense table, his face a mask. The boy who had once been their father's pride now stared blankly, eyes hollow, as if the weight of his choices had finally crushed him. The courtroom became a mirror, forcing each of them to see not just Jake's guilt, but the truths they had avoided for years. For Monica, it was the years of silence, the years of being invisible while carrying a burden greater than they could imagine. For her father, it was the years of jokes, the decades of dismissing his daughter while exalting the son who now faced prison. For Emma, it was the realization that her carefully crafted image of family perfection had cracked beyond repair. The prosecutor's closing argument was merciless in its simplicity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice even, almost gentle, "this is not a case of mistakes. This is not a case of oversight. This is theft. Theft from children, from families who trusted the defendant to provide opportunity, to provide hope. And instead he took that hope and bought himself luxury. The evidence is clear. The intent is clear. The crime is clear." He stepped back, his words hanging in the silence. Peterson followed with bluster, with fire, with appeals to emotion. He painted Jake as a victim of paperwork, as a man overwhelmed by responsibilities, as someone who loved children too much to ever steal from them. His voice cracked, his gestures wide, but the words rang hollow. When the jury filed out, the silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Her father sat rigid, eyes forward, lips moving silently as if in prayer. Her mother wept quietly into her hands. Emma stared at Jake, her face pale, her fingers twisting nervously. Monica sat still, composed, a storm inside but calm on the surface. Hours passed. The jury deliberated. Reporters filled the courthouse steps, cameras ready, questions sharp as knives. The family huddled in a corner of the hallway, silence stretched taut between them. Every so often, Emma whispered to her husband, her words clipped, frantic. Their mother leaned against Monica, fragile, her sobs quieter now, worn out from repetition. Her father stood apart, arms crossed, his face unreadable, but Monica saw the cracks, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched, the way his eyes darted to her, then away, then back again, as if he were trying to reconcile two truths at once, the Admiral and the dishwasher. The bailiff's call came. "Jury has reached a verdict." The family filed back inside. The air was electric with anticipation. The jury returned, solemn, eyes fixed ahead. "On the count of wire fraud," the foreperson said, voice steady, "we find the defendant guilty." Her mother gasped. Emma's hand shot to her mouth. Her father flinched as if struck. "On the count of embezzlement," the foreperson continued, "we find the defendant guilty." The words fell like hammer blows. "On the count of misappropriation of funds, guilty." Each word sealed Jake's fate. Each word dismantled the image their father had clung to for decades. Jake closed his eyes. His shoulders sagged. For the first time in weeks, the mask slipped. He looked broken, smaller, not the golden son, but just a man caught in the consequences of his own choices. The judge's voice followed, calm but unyielding. Sentencing would come later, but the weight of the verdict was already final. Her father cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears of embarrassment, but raw, broken sobs. The sound filled the courtroom, cutting through the silence, drawing stares from strangers who had never seen him falter. Monica sat still, her chest tight. She wanted to reach for him, but she didn't move. Not yet. Reporters surged forward as the session ended, cameras flashing, voices calling. "Admiral Phillips, is it true you oversaw the investigation? Admiral, can you comment on your brother's crimes? Admiral, how does it feel to see your family in this position?" She ignored them, her face a mask of composure, her silence louder than any answer. In the parking lot, the family stood together, though unity was the last thing they felt. Her father's face was red, his eyes swollen, his shoulders slumped. Her mother clung to him, trembling. Emma stood apart, arms crossed, her gaze sharp and cold. Her father finally spoke, his voice low, broken. "Monica," he swallowed hard. I need you to know, all those things I said." She met his eyes, steady, bracing. "I know, Dad." "No," his voice cracked. Tears filled his eyes again. "You don't. I was proud of you. I was always proud of you. I didn't understand, and I was scared." "Scared of what?" Her voice was soft. "Of losing you," he whispered. Emma stayed close. "Jake was the son I understood, but you were always so smart, so driven. When you left for the academy, I thought you were leaving us behind. I thought if I made light of it, made it smaller, maybe it wouldn't take you so far away." His words pierced deeper than any insult ever had. She stood there, 41 years old, hearing her father admit for the first time the fear that had shaped decades of cruelty. "I was never leaving you behind," she said quietly. "I just needed you to see that where I was going mattered too." For the first time in years he nodded, slowly. Understanding flickered in his eyes, faint but real. Emma turned away, muttering something Monica couldn't hear. Her mother clutched her hand tightly, whispering through tears, "We're so sorry, so sorry." Monica stood there in the fading light of the courthouse parking lot. Her family broken, their illusions shattered, their truths finally exposed. And she realized something she had never let herself admit before. She had never needed their validation to know her worth. Her sailors knew, her superiors knew, the Navy knew, the country knew. But hearing it now, seeing her father cry, hearing his whispered confession, it meant everything. What does a family look like after the gavel falls? For days after the verdict, the Phillips home was thick with silence. Reporters still lingered on the street, their cameras waiting for any glimpse of a comment, any reaction they could turn into a headline. Neighbors whispered over fences, glancing toward the house with pity or curiosity. Inside, the air was heavier than Monica had ever known. Her mother moved slowly through the rooms, her hands busy with chores that didn't need doing, as if motion could keep her from collapsing under the weight. Emma snapped at small things, a misplaced mug, a door left ajar, her nerves fraying with each passing hour. And her father sat often in his office, the trophies of Jake's coaching years still gleaming on the shelves, now hollow reminders of a pride that had crumbled. Monica stayed quiet. She slept little, spent hours walking the neighborhood at night, her footsteps carrying her past houses where families laughed over dinners, unaware of the storm in the Phillips household. She thought often about the sailors she had led, how crises had forged them into stronger units, how shared burdens had become bonds. But here, at home, crisis was only pulling them further apart. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. The courtroom felt smaller this time, the crowd thinner. The verdict had already drained the spectacle from the case. Now only the inevitable remained. Jake stood at the defense table, his suit rumpled, his face pale. The man who had once been the golden boy looked worn, defeated. His lawyer muttered last appeals for leniency, pointing to community ties, to coaching years, to family support. The words fell flat. The prosecutor spoke briefly, his tone even. The theft was systematic, deliberate, and devastating. The victims were children who trusted him. The sentence must reflect that. The judge's voice was calm, unyielding. Mr. Phillips, you are hereby sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, with restitution in full to the Youth Athletics Foundation. The sound of the gavel struck like thunder. Her mother sobbed openly. Emma pressed her hands to her face, shaking. Her father bowed his head, tears falling silently onto the wooden bench. Jake turned once, his eyes searching the gallery, for his family, for sympathy, for something. His gaze met Monica. For a brief moment there was no golden boy, no disgraced coach, no convicted criminal, just a brother and a sister staring across the gulf of choices. His lips parted, but no words came. Then the bailiff took his arm and he was led away in cuffs. Her father wept then, broken sobs that filled the room. The proud man who had built a business, who had told jokes at his daughter's expense, now clung to tissues like a drowning man. Monica stood still, her face composed, though inside her chest felt like it was splitting open. She had seen men taken in cuffs before. She had signed warrants, overseen arrests, watched justice move like a machine, but never had it been her brother. Never had the weight of family pressed against duty so hard. Outside the courthouse, the cameras caught every tear, every step. Reporters shouted questions. Admiral Phillips, what do you say to the victims? Admiral, how does it feel to see your brother sentenced? Admiral, will you continue to oversee cases like this? She said nothing. She walked past them, her silence louder than their words. That night back at the family home, the fracture deepened. Her father approached her in the kitchen, his eyes red, his voice raw. "Monica," he whispered, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. Not after all these years, but I need you to know I see you now. I see you." She met his eyes. For the first time there was no smirk, no dismissal, just regret, just truth. "I never needed your forgiveness," she said softly. "I just needed you to see me." He nodded, tears falling again. "I do. God help me, I do." Her mother hugged her tightly, murmuring apologies, words that came too late but carried weight nonetheless. Emma, though, stood apart. Her voice was sharp, brittle. "You let us live in that lie for years. You let Dad humiliate you. You let me dismiss you. And now you stand here like you're above us all." Monica's gaze was steady. "I never needed to be above you. I just wanted to be beside you." Emma's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. She turned away, muttering, "I don't even know who you are." Monica didn't answer. Some truths couldn't be forced. Some wounds needed time. In the days that followed, her father began to call her. Not with jokes, not with dismissals, but with questions. Real questions. About her work. About her responsibilities. About what it meant to be an admiral. His voice was awkward, clumsy, but genuine. For the first time in her life, he was trying to understand her world. Monica sat often in her Pentagon office, the phone pressed to her ear, listening as her father stumbled through words of pride and regret. And each time, something inside her softened. A wound she hadn't known was still bleeding, beginning to heal. But at night, when the calls ended and the office grew quiet, she sat alone, staring out at the courtyard where uniforms moved with purpose. And she thought about dignity, about silence, about what it had cost her and what it had preserved. She had never crushed her father's jokes with anger. She had never demanded their recognition. She had let her work speak in silence. And in the end, the silence had carried her here to truth, to regret, to a family forced to finally see her. The cost had been heavy, the years lost, the moments missed. But as she stood at her window, watching the night settle over the city, she whispered a truth to herself, a truth she had earned with every sacrifice. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And for the first time, she believed it. How does a family find its way back from ruin? The months after Jake's sentencing moved slowly, like a ship turning against a heavy current. The house in Westerville felt different, quieter, emptier, but no longer with the brittle silence of denial. It was the silence of grief, of reckoning, of starting over. Reporters drifted away after the sentencing. The story moved down the news cycle, replaced by fresher scandals, new headlines. But in their small town, the whispers remained. At the grocery store, at church, at the Rotary Club, people lowered their voices when the Phillips name came up. Some whispered in pity, others in judgment. Monica returned to Washington, her uniform once again her armor, her office at the Pentagon a place where she was respected without question. Her days were filled with reports, with briefings, with decisions that stretched far beyond the boundaries of her family's small town. Yet at night, when the office grew quiet and the city lights glittered outside her window, she found herself thinking of Westerville, of her father, her mother, her sister, of the years lost to silence. The first call came on an ordinary Wednesday. Her aide had transferred the line into her office. "Admiral Phillips, your father is on the line." For a moment, Monica almost didn't pick up, but then she did. "Is this Admiral Phillips?" her father asked, his voice oddly formal. "Yes," she said, "this is Admiral Phillips." "This is your father," he said, and she could hear the pride, fragile, awkward, but real, trembling under the words. "I was wondering if you might have time to talk to your old man." They spoke for an hour, longer than any conversation they had ever had. He asked about her work, really asked, about her responsibilities, about her command, about what it meant to be Rear Admiral. His questions were clumsy, sometimes naive, but his voice carried something new, respect. Before they hung up, he surprised her. "Monica, I've been thinking. All those years I introduced you as my daughter who washes dishes on ships. I was wrong. And next week at the Rotary Club dinner, I'd like to introduce you properly. Would you come?" She sat at her desk, staring out the window at the courtyard where men and women in uniform crossed with purpose. Her chest tightened. "I'd like that, Dad," she said softly. "I'd like that very much." The night of the dinner came crisp and cool, the autumn air carrying the smell of fallen leaves. Monica arrived in uniform, the stars gleaming on her shoulders, the weight of them heavier than ever. Not because of duty, but because tonight, for the first time, her father would see them for what they meant. The Rotary Club hall buzzed with voices, with laughter, with the clinking of glasses. Old friends of her father greeted him, expecting the same jokes, the same introductions they had heard for decades. But tonight he stood taller, his shoulders squared, his voice steady. "Gentlemen," he said, clearing his throat, "this is my daughter, Rear Admiral Monica Phillips." The room quieted, heads turned, eyes widened, and for once the silence that followed was not one of dismissal but of awe. Monica felt her father's hand rest lightly on her shoulder. His grip trembled, but his pride radiated. "She's not the dishwasher I always joked about," he said, his voice breaking. "She's the strongest person I've ever known." Applause rose, awkward at first, then stronger. The room filled with it, the sound wrapping around her like a tide. And Monica stood there, not for the recognition, not for the applause, but for the quiet truth in her father's eyes. Afterward, as they walked to the car, her father spoke softly. "I wasted so many years. I wish I had seen you sooner." She looked at him, the man who had once made her a punchline, now humbled, softened by regret. "You see me now," she said. "That's enough." Her mother hugged her fiercely, tears in her eyes but joy in her smile. Even Emma, standing slightly apart, finally offered a small nod. Not acceptance yet, not forgiveness, but the beginning of something less brittle. On the drive back to Washington the next morning, Monica felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of silence was gone. The burden of invisibility had lifted. She had carried her truth alone for decades, but now, finally, her family carried a piece of it with her. In her office later that week, she paused at the window, looking out at the city bathed in the golden light of dusk. She thought about her sailors, about her missions, about the sacrifices that had defined her life. She thought about her father's tears, her mother's embrace, Emma's reluctant nod. And she thought about dignity, about how it had shaped her, about how it had cost her and saved her all at once. Sometimes she realized dignity doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it doesn't crush those who doubt it. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in the end, that had been enough.